Christ midweek Bible study, and we are picking up where we left off last week, and that, I believe, is 1 Timothy chapter 5, and we left off at the end of verse 13, so we'll pick up at verse 14. And so as we look at the beginning of 1 Timothy 5 at verse 14, we see the word therefore. It says, "Therefore I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully." And so we want to always, as good students, we should ask ourselves, what is the therefore? That is pointing back to the previous paragraphs, the previous part of the chapter, leading up to verse 14. And so it's speaking about, going back to the beginning of chapter 5, talks about how to treat elders, how to treat the older among us, I suppose you should say, and how to deal with widows. That before a widow is taken into the number of those that are helped by the church, that there should be there's a criteria that has to be met, that they don't have family that can help take care of them, and that they are truly a widow, truly left alone. But younger widows to briefly summarize, of childbearing age and so on, that are able, should remarry, have children, be a faithful wife, basically. And you can go back to last week's video if you're catching this and didn't catch last week's lesson. You can go back and we talked about that in depth. But so now we come down because of those things that were talked about. For instance, verse 9: "Do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number." Those sorts of things. Because of those. At verse 14, we begin, "Therefore I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, and give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully." Verse 15, "For some have already turned aside after Satan. If any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows." So we'll stop there, because we're going to get into elders here in just a moment. But those two paragraphs, basically, there for 14 through 16. What do we want to point out there? Is there anything that stands out?
To me, it kind of, it does show the fact that if you were married and your husband passes away, you have every right to remarry again.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and there are other places in the scriptures that outline the criteria for who is able to remarry. And certainly a widow would qualify in those in that situation. So yes, that's a little further evidence, compounding the evidence there that remarriage is possible. So we have there in verse 15, it says, "For some have already turned aside after Satan." So what are we kind of getting at here? In verse 11, we kind of have a connection there. "But refuse the younger widows, for when they have begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry, having condemnation, because they have cast off their first faith. And besides, they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not." So, you might look at this, and you might look at that and think, well, that sounds pretty harsh. That sounds like we're painting with a pretty broad brush. And some might think that sounds unfair. But what are we really talking about here? Is this bashing women? Is this bashing young women? No. It's speaking of human nature. It's speaking of what happens, and we can see it out in the world. This can happen to men too, if they lose track of their first love, Christ. If they lose track of where the direction they're supposed to be going in, it becomes an issue. And when it comes to marriage and remarriage and widows, let's just go back to the beginning and what is the hierarchy. I don't even know if I want to use that word, but what is the plan for the family according to God?
The pecking order?
Yeah, the pecking order. Who is technically and legally and lawfully, according to the scriptures, who is in charge of the family? That would be the husband. Yeah, that would be the husband. And there are all sorts of reasons why, and that's a whole nother 10 lessons in and of itself. If you look back to Genesis and look back at the fall of mankind in the garden, that's where it begins, when God tells Eve, that her desire is to be for her husband, and the husband is the one that is going to be making the ultimate decisions. Now, in context of the rest of the scriptures, and again, this is another one of those other 10 lessons that I was talking about. This is not a misogynistic idea. This is not meaning that the man should rule over his wife with an iron fist. That it means that there is an equality there in a good godly marriage, but there is an order to things. There is an ultimate order to things. And so a widow who is left without a husband to make those decisions, following in line with God's original plan for the family, it would make sense that those that can remarry and rekindle or be a part again of a family that is according to God's design, that it just makes logical sense that would be what is required. And so you have perhaps again some words and some buzzwords that in the world may cause people to gasp and be taken aback by this idea. They may call it misogynistic and so on, but if you really take this whole thing into context, it has to do with God's desire ultimately that his people be taken care of, and that the family continue to be able to be protected from the evil one, from sinful desires and so on. Now, again, a husband without a wife is I guess they're not a husband anymore without a wife, but you get what I'm saying. They're just as vulnerable to sin and to falling into some sinful things, as the woman. In fact, I heard it was kind of made me chuckle, but I know some brethren whom the wife had told her husband that if she were to die, that he is to get married immediately after her death. Understanding that he was going to need he's going to need help. He's going to need a helper, and that he would be incomplete otherwise. And so that just really kind of gets down to this idea that the Lord made mankind to be a part of this union of marriage, and it is a good thing, and it is something that, if it should be cut short by reason of the death of one of them, that there is an outline here for what to do.
Paul is dealing with a very common situation, and it's good that he gave some instruction here, because this would come back, this is after, Jesus condemned the Jews for taking advantage of the widows.
Mm-hmm.
And that was some pretty strict condemnation there. Why? Because a widow take advantage of. They socially, they were usually not influential
Mm-hmm.
and well-to-do or anything like that, and they would fall into poverty, and they were easy to take advantage of. And,
Yeah.
and the Jews of all people, they were knowing that. And so here, Paul is stating the different situations that occur with widows when their husbands die, and he's doing that for a very good reason. But today we don't have quite that problem, at least not in this country.
Mm-hmm.
In other cultures, it's a no-brainer that if a woman's husband died, the family would take her in. That's just a no-brainer. In their
Yeah.
culture, they believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in our culture, I'm not so sure.
Ship them off to the home, right?
Yeah,
That's,
we've kind of wavered on that.
yeah.
We kind of wavered on that one, and we're not taking care of the family as we should, I believe, in this country.
Yeah.
And now we're fortunate though in this country that we do have some means and some places to go when you get into these kind of situations. Back then, they didn't have that. They had no,
Right.
they had no social safety net.
Yeah.
They had zero.
And when you look at our society now, the women among us are, earning, they're earning their own money. It's not like it was culturally in the past. So a woman whose husband passes away today is not in a dire emergency situation. Maybe not. It depends on the situation. It could be a situation like that. But generally, you're right. In our society, in our time, this doesn't quite hit the same way. But ultimately, the plan that God has is still there and should be adhered to as much as possible.
Back then, the women were much more dedicated to the home.
Yeah.
And even in our society, probably up until the 50s, maybe or thereabouts,
Yeah.
women were more dedicated to the home, and that's the best possible situation. It works.
Yeah.
That's God's plan. It works best that way. That doesn't mean you can't work. A woman can't work. That doesn't mean that.
Yeah.
But God has pretty much laid out a plan, and as things go on in your life, you need to keep that in mind that you have a responsibility. And
Yeah.
just because you work doesn't mean you can shirk those responsibilities. So
Right.
you got to get things working together and take care of things that need to be taken care of as God has planned out for us.
I would venture, I'll go out on a limb here and open myself up for ridicule. But I do think that after that time, as you're pointing out, maybe the 50s, maybe the 60s, when our culture changed to the point where, women were outside of the home more and working, getting into the workforce more. There's various reasons, and we won't get into that, but I would say it looks as though if you were to look back through history, you can probably draw a line there somewhere and realize that society took started a downward spiral about that time. I mean, when women were at home and the family was more in line with God's plan for the family, young boys grew up to be men, and young women grew up to be strong women, and the family was, and the country, the world was in a much better place when those.
Probably started, I'm going to say back into the 40s during the war.
During the war, yeah.
During the war, that's when all the women were called on to work in the factories.
Yeah, that's probably.
I think that's where it all started.
You're probably right. But we can see that. We can see the evidence of that and the things that have happened since in our society today, and we can see that God is right. When He established the way that the family is supposed to be. Now, there's all kinds of wild cards out there. Of course, there are situations that, perhaps, didn't work out. There's always that wild card. But in general, if you're honest and you look back through history, you can see that God's ways are better. And I'm not saying that in the 40s and 50s and 60s that every family was totally godly, but there are things that are just true. When we talked about the truth in some lessons in the past, and the things that are true, you can know them by their fruit, the scriptures say. And so if something is true, whether it's done in a way that is God-fearing, or if it's just the way that people realize works best, ultimately that truth still bears out that same fruit. And it can be known for what it is, as the truth. And so, say that.
That the apostles were in, it was common that families were very together. You can have 4 or 5 or 6 families together. And if you look back in America's history, look back at the 20s, look at the 30s, look at before that even.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't uncommon for more than one family to be under one roof.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I said this maybe last week. I know I said it recently, that I think that, in our society today, since I guess I'm thinking it was the 30s, when the New Deal started and when the welfare system started to come into play, when we put more on the government and took it away from the family, I think we robbed ourselves of the blessing of being able to take care of one another. And it's there's something to be said for that. There's something to be said for that. Instead of saying, well, we'll just let the government take care of it, it was upon the family and individuals to take care of those who were needy, and it helped everybody all the way around. And we can see that there's a family in my neighborhood that they're from another country, and the whole family lives together. Grandma, mom, dad, the kids, they're all together in one place, and so it's a good thing. It's a good thing. We don't often think that way in our society today, for many reasons. But anyways, as we think about those things, as we kind of put that one to bed as far as widows and what is to be done there. Now we go to verse 17, and we get more into the organization of the church, and we look at elders. In verse 17 of 1 Timothy 5, it says, "Let the elders who rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine. For the scripture says, 'You shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain, and the laborer is worthy of his wages. Do not receive an accusation against an elder except from 2 or 3 witnesses. Those who are sinning rebuke in the presence of all, that the rest also may fear.'" So a couple of verses there, speaking of the elders who are to be watching over the flock. Those that do well are worthy of double honor. So what does that look like? What's that mean? How do you bestow double honor?
Well, it's obviously a verse that's been used to justify a preacher paying a preacher and or an elder.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the time, well, I could say because whatever God's reasons are, here it is. You can
Yeah, extrapolate
yeah.
ideas. Yeah, but no doubt it does. It does. I can stand here as a preacher and an elder, and I can tell you that sometimes jokingly, my wife says, "Well, she'll have something that needs picked up, and she'll say, 'Well, John can do it because he doesn't work,' and I know she doesn't mean that, but there is work that is done, and a lot of work is done behind the scenes and so on. And so I understand that. That perhaps hits me a little bit different than someone else. But certainly, it is something that we should, anybody who's in charge, if you're in charge of a business, I've been a business owner in the past, and I can tell you it's not for the faint of heart to be in charge of any kind of group of people. And again, I'm not in charge like ruling over and lording over, but you get the idea. If you have to make the decisions, if you have to be in that position, it's an uncomfortable one at times. So, go ahead.
We should avoid that type of thinking that the preacher is an employee of the church.
Right.
Or elder, if he's being paid, is an employee of the church.
Yeah.
No, it's not neat that.
Yeah. I saw, and I don't know, you make your own judgment about this, but I saw a want ad, if you will, for a preacher for a Church of Christ. And, sometimes those things come across my email just because of the circles that I run in, the people that I know, and so on. And I saw this church was looking, this assembly was looking for a preacher to come work with them. And they had a laundry list that every week the preacher is going to be at the building from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and it was you're gonna do this much writing, and you're gonna do this much of this, and you're gonna do this much of that, and you're gonna clean the toilets, and they had a whole laundry list of things that were there, and I kind of I don't know them, so I'm not passing a reserve of judgment, but it kind of looks like they were looking for an employee, that they were looking for someone to punch a time clock to justify a salary. And I will leave that one up to you to think about that. But I think that could be a little bit of a red flag floating in the wind there. So like as Rick said, the preacher, the elder, I guess I'm adding. You can tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth you don't agree with, but the preacher, the elder is no different than any other brother or sister that is amongst us, except for the role that they've taken on and the seriousness of being watchful and being the guard dog, if you will, over the flock.
Well, there's a lot of, I'd venture to say, quite a few places that will seem to indicate anyhow that, and I'm talking now different religions, that if you are a preacher, there's a lot of responsibility put on you that really should be put on the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
And just because you're a preacher, you have this is your responsibility. And boy, I'll tell you what, you can get a laundry list out like you wouldn't believe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And for one thing that might come to mind is the idea that and I'm not pointing fingers outwardly here, but there are some that believe that it is the preacher's sole job to go out and win all the souls in the community. And they kind of wash their hands of that responsibility to go and evangelize and share the word as well. So that's one of those things that is we look at these things and we look at what is expected of us. There are certain things that elders are over, making sure that the doctrine is correct that is being taught. The preacher, of course, as well, is going to do those things. And again, verse 18, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain, and the laborer is worthy of his wages. So that's a point that needed to be made in the first century, and it stands for us today. Go on to talk about do not receive an accusation against an elder except from 2 or 3 witnesses. Those who are sinning rebuke in the presence of all, that the rest also may fear. So what's different about receiving an accusation against an elder or another brother or sister.
Nothing.
Right? Yeah, this is kind of a reiteration of what we're supposed to do if we have a problem with our brother. You know, we're to take the brethren with us, take some witnesses with us, and talk to them personally first, and then take some witnesses with you if it doesn't get resolved, and work that out together. And it ultimately goes up to, of course, the elders, and then before the assembly. So
Matthew 18 says, take one or two with you, take it before the church. There's a progression of protocol.
right.
How to go about it.
Yeah, and it's really not saying anything different here. It's absolutely, it's kind of the same thing. So, let's see here. And those who are sinning, rebuke in the presence of all, that the rest also may fear. Now, this is something that is, it seems like those of us here in the United States in 2026, we have, our stomach is a little bit weak for such things. To ruffle feathers and to do something as bold as to rebuke one who has gone astray, who has sinned. So we need to remember that is something that we can't stand to be around sin. We shouldn't stand for it. The Lord is not going to stand for it. And if it is among us, it needs to be, and it's not something that is being if that person refuses to repent and turn away from that thing, then it needs to be called out. And that's something that is not very popular. It's not very popular in the church. Angela and I, years ago, left a group that had some major issues, and they were doing a lot of things against the pattern of the scriptures. And it was not something that anybody wanted to deal with. Nobody wanted to call it out. So we left, and we found the Lord's Church. And the very day that we went to sit down and visit with an assembly of the Lord's Church, we heard at the end of their lesson that one of the elders got up after the service and read a letter, and there was a brother or sister who had gone astray, and they had tried to talk to them, and they were exercising church discipline, and they were calling out that sin. And it was kind of like, whoa, okay, they're willing to do this.
Wouldn't that be the same as what you're talking about here?
Yeah.
Just a different kind of
Yeah.
format.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, when the elders finish saying, we're going to disfellowship this person because they've lacked attendance or whatever the case might be,
Mm-hmm.
you're rebuking him and that person in front of.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I bring that up just to remind us that it's such a rare thing. We don't see that unfortunately. And not that we need to go and start rebuking everybody for no cause, but there's not people don't seem to have a stomach for difficult things.
Well, the work has already been done and put out about talking to that, or should have been.
Yes.
By the elders or
Right.
people that know the situation, to try and bring that person around, and that's the last resort.
Yeah.
It gets called out for the.
Yeah. Yeah. But you just can't stand for. You just cannot allow the sin to kind of build up and cause an issue rumbling under the surface over time, and then it's eventually going to blow over, and it causes. I've seen it. I've seen in congregations where it eventually causes a split, where there's no communication and there's no adherence to the biblical structure of what is supposed to be done. Then people get angry and the body splits, and sometimes it's just ridiculous.
When that last step is taken, that is publicly announced that person
Yeah.
has been disfellowshipped, that is the last straw.
Yeah.
Can't go any more than that. But
Right.
everybody at least is informed of what the situation is.
Yeah.
Why it's being done and why it's being meted out to that person. And it should serve as I don't want to say a warning, but to others to don't practice what this person did, because it's not in keeping with what the Lord wants us to do or be.
Yeah. It's really, there's a simple concept that I think is evident in the world. And all of this sounds trite, but all of the problems of the world could be solved if people would understand that people come from different perspectives, that they would be willing to communicate, and then ultimately that if they would be willing to adhere to the gospel. I mean, that would just fix everything, in a nutshell. But that's a big ask because of the self-willed nature of human beings. I mean, we all run into that.
I think society has influenced the church tremendously,
Yeah,
which unfortunately should not happen.
yeah,
But if you've been around for a while, I think you can see it from, again, starting when things really started to get liberal in the 50s, 60s,
yeah,
70s, society, that gets brought into the church. That
Yeah.
kind of thinking gets brought into the church. And I'm not even saying intentionally. You get influenced,
mm-hmm,
you're going to bring it wherever you go.
yeah,
And so we bring it into the church. And so we get influenced by the thinking of the world, and we're bringing it into the church. And then when you try to do something like this, it becomes almost impossible, because
yeah,
the way everybody thinks, and well, you can't do that, and who are you to say this? I mean, you get into that whole mindset. Instead of dealing with it, just like Scripture tells us.
right,
And,
Yeah.
And I think you're right, a lot of churches split over that kind of stuff,
mm-hmm,
and the church is definitely weakened.
yeah.
by that.
I mean, from the outside, people look and say, well, look, they can't even get along. So why would I want to go be a part of that? People are watching. The world's watching. And I've been blessed to be under some strong elderships in my time as a Christian. I know that I've heard murmuring sometimes when the elders make a decision and it seems like a hard line. And they're like, why are they so staunch? Why are they so hard-nosed about this, that, or the other thing? And it's exactly what you were saying. They're working diligently to make sure things don't creep in, because we are seeing, the church today as a whole, it appears to be weaker than that of 100 years ago, and 100 years before that. It doesn't seem like it's getting stronger as a whole. Well, there are strong individual groups that are adhering to this, but if we let the world in just a little bit at a time, pretty soon it'll take over in some way.
Rick can attest to this. Over the years, here at this congregation, we have not had elders, we have had elders, we have not, we have.
Mm-hmm.
And over that course of time, when there were no elders, it was up to the men to make judgment calls, not judgment calls, but
Yeah.
to bring up the fact that somebody is not doing something right.
Right.
And the men would have to get together, just as if elders were having to do it as well.
Right.
So that point that Paul is giving to Timothy, I personally believe that it falls on the men as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's really, as individual members of the Lord's church, and I use that word member, carefully, but those belonging to Christ, individual Christians, they're to be watching, they're to be vigilant as well. The elders are the ones that where the buck stops, I suppose, but individual brethren, if you see something that is going awry, it is incumbent upon you to also do something and to bring it to the attention of that person. And of course, we were talking about the steps that are to be taken to handle a situation.
And I think, on the other hand, on your side of lost people
Mhm.
that just, they don't want to accept that.
Right.
They say, okay, you do whatever you want to do, how you want to do it. I'm not doing that anymore. And they eventually leave the church, leave,
Yeah,
or go somewhere else that's not scriptural,
right.
you know, but
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've
and that's the other side of it.
unfortunately seen that several times in my lifetime as a Christian. Yeah, and it's and it's one of the things that we should all watch out for, because that starts as a little tiny snowball, and it just picks up momentum, as time goes on. And that's why when we're talking about elders who rule well, that it's encompassing all of those things, being watchful for those things, and you can't do that without the help of the brethren as well. The brethren have to be on board and on the same page with the Lord's plan for His church, and that's there are always there's always going to be, it seems, those that perhaps have trouble with authority. You'll see that sometimes in a workplace. If someone can't keep a job, sometimes it's because they can't handle authority. They can't handle being told that this is the way things need to be done, and so they do things their own way. And the business world won't put up with that. And so God kind of said it first, and we should listen to Him. Anything else to pick out there? I know Ed has rung one buzzer, so it's about time for the invitation. But again, verse 19, do not receive an accusation against an elder. We had talked about that, no different than what would be for an individual Christian really as well. And those who are sinning rebuke in the presence of all, that the rest also may fear. And again, this is not some sort of, to make an example of somebody, but it should be known and it should be understood that there are consequences, not by the individual elders and not by the human part of the church, but because the Lord said so. There are consequences, and we need to remember that for eternity. But in the here and the now, we need to police ourselves according to the scriptures as well. I mean, it's can you think of one little thing, and then I'll stop talking. Can you think of municipalities that you drive through, and there are some municipalities that you're like, I really need to pay attention to the speedometer because I know these guys really watch. You know that when you roll through that town, you want to make sure you're doing the speed limit. Where in other places where you've never seen a police officer before, maybe you don't look at the speedometer as much. And so that's just human nature. And when we see the church working as it's supposed to, you're going to have those situations, and everybody should take heed. So any other closing thoughts before we turn it over to Rick? Okay. Thanks for your input.
Just for a few minutes, I'd like to talk to us about making some plans. Fran and I have been following a television program that has been on the last few nights. I think it's over with now, isn't it? It's over. And the television program's name is Disasters That Changed America. I don't know if any of you have seen that or not. No?
The day that changed America.
The day that changed America? Okay. I stand corrected. That's what it's for. Or what the title of it is. But it talks about the disasters that have been tremendous and have had a large effect on America. And the first one it talked about was the Boston Marathon race. And that was just a few years ago. And if you recall, some terrorists, placed a couple of different places bombs that went off at a certain time and detonated and killed many people, or several people, and injured many others. And it was a result of a bomb. But the next one they talked about, or one of the ones they talked about, in addition to that one, was the Oklahoma Federal Building. You remember that over in was it Tulsa? Or is it Oklahoma City? That's right. And they drove a big truck up in front of the building, and it was full of explosives, and it detonated and killed a lot of people. And it was really heartrending to see those pictures of even small children, like 1 year and 2 year old, because there was a nursery in the building, and it killed a lot of young innocent children. But again, a lot of problems with that, injuring people even that had to be born for years. Another one that talked about was the 1981 Challenger NASA rocket failure, that when it went up, it blew up and killed everybody on board. We never had one of those before. Our program, the NASA program, was always squeaky clean. They've never had really any problems with loss of life like that, and it was a horrific experience, especially when you see the numbers of people that were watching it. And it was several of the people that were interviewed for these different things, incidents, said it was a beautiful fall day, or it was a beautiful spring day. The sky was clear, and it was just talking about the weather, and had something horrific happen like that. And that was due to a mechanical failure. I think they finally reasoned was the cause of the accident, some leaky O-rings or something like that. But in reality, a fella came forward and said it was because they had postponed it so long that moisture had built up inside the thing or something like that and exploded, and that's the reason it was done. And the last one I want to mention is about the 911, September 11th, 2011, or 1999, 911. Yeah, I got to remember that. But the planes that were flown by terrorists and crashed into the Trade Center towers in New York City were brought down by those actions. And again, a horrific way to see things, that all those people, and the video, they kept advertising on the TV that the content of this program you're watching has some horrific things to see in it that may be offensive to some or small children. But anyway, when they showed those pictures, and I hadn't seen it before, at least I don't recall it, of people jumping out of the windows on the 75th floor or something like that, and coming out of the building and just free falling. And one fireman that went into some little shelter area there said that those bodies were falling around him. It wasn't safe to be on the sidewalk because of those people jumping out the windows. Just terrible things like that you think about in retrospect, how many people lost their lives and so on. And you have to ask yourself a question, this question, at least I did it: how many of those people that were killed do you think possibly thought that that would be their last time on earth, the last day that they lived on earth, that they wouldn't have the chance to say goodbye to their loved ones or to make arrangements for what goes on and so on, life duties? But how many of them do you think thought about it or even entered their thought? They just got up, again, and they were saying it was a beautiful day, the sun was shining and all that, and yet they went to work and got involved in that thing because no fault of their own. And who would have expected something like that? Nothing's been done like that before in our society. But many people perished in those accidents, wherever they were, in those litany of ones that I mentioned here. How many people perished? God has a plan for us all, and his plan is pretty well spelled out in Mark 16, 15, and 16. I'd like to read that for you. This is out the
disciples going out, and he said unto them, Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Verse 16, He who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. So if you believe and are baptized, you're going to be saved, and if you choose not to believe, you're going to be condemned. Now that's about as tersely worded as you could have it. I mean, it's a very succinct way of saying, if you obey God and are baptized and become a believer, then you're going to be saved. If you don't, you're going to be condemned to a torment. It's as simple as that. But God's plan for all mankind and men, both men and women, is not going to save them if they don't take advantage of it. If they don't do those things that He has told us to do in His will, namely being baptized and becoming a believer in the teaching of His Word. There's no question about the fact that our judgment is certain. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10, it says, For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. Everyone. For we must all appear. Everyone is going to appear. Now that's kind of a mind-boggling thing to think about, that all of humanity will be there, and they're all going to be judged by God, and everyone is going to stand on their own 2 feet, basically, and have to give an answer. But there's no question about that being a fact of the Bible. And also I'd like to read for you from Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 27. And there it says, And as it is appointed for men to die once, but after this, the judgment. So there's no getting around the fact that we're going to be judged, and we're going to stand before God and give an account of things. So I'd also like to make mention of the fact in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9, it talks about God. And people, when these things happened, human wisdom says, why would God allow such a thing like this to happen? Why did he allow this? And in chapter 3 of 2 Peter verse 9, it says, God is not willing that any should perish, but is long-suffering toward us, but that all should come to repentance. He wants us to come to repentance. That's His design for us, to be saved eternally. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to look forward to the time of our passing, is because we've prepared for that time that we're going to meet God. There's no avoiding the fact that we're going to die. Everybody knows that. No, what's the old saying? No one's getting out of here alive. So we're all going to perish one way or another, and whether natural causes or some accident like we talked about. But repentance is what God has planned for us to avail ourselves to and become in a saved condition. And you know, it's interesting that He's made that way, because you know, we all make plans for a will after our passing. Why is that? Because we want to see to it that our wealth and our loved ones are taken care of as best we can, help prepare them for that time when you're no longer here. Or we plan for retirement. Everybody plans for retirement some way, unless you pass away before you're in retirement. But you make plans for that, and people make plans that they're going to travel, or they're going to get a motor home, or they're going to move to a sunny climate, to get, all sorts of things they make plans for, and they go to a lot of extremes to make certain that those plans are in place. But even for something as simple as a vacation, when we plan just to go on a vacation, we make sure that we're someplace that has a motel and that we're close to the city where we want to be, or the amusement park that we want to go to, or the sites that we want to see. We do all that planning in meticulous ways to make sure that our expectations will come to fruition. But when do we make plans to meet our Maker? Where in the plan of things in our existence does man take time or sit down and say, What about God's place in my life? Where is he come into play? What do I need to make plans for regarding that? So the question comes down to the fact that we have to ask ourselves, when do we have time for God? Where do our plans include him in our plans for eternity after this life is over? Or another way of saying is, what is our plans for eternity? We plan for everything else. What about eternity? So if you're listening to us tonight at home or on the computer or on Zoom or wherever it might be in our audience here, we need to really think serious about that, because God has planned a way for us to avoid that condemnation that he talked about in Mark 16. And we can avoid that type of fiery torment if we're obedient and come to him in humble obedience and do his will. So if there are any who are out there that need to talk about that with someone or to study with someone, if you would contact us, we'd be glad to talk with you or study with you. And if you understand you need to do it, then believe me, you need to do it right away, because we don't know that we'll have another day to spend on this earth. There's no guarantee for tomorrow. We could leave here in a heartbeat or less. So if in any way you're subject to the invitation, come to the front while together we stand and sing, or get in touch with us.
There's a great day coming, a great day coming, there's a great day coming by and by, when the saints and the sinners shall be parted right and left. Are you ready for that day to come? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? There's a bright day coming, a bright day coming, there's a bright day coming by and by, but its brightness shall only come to them that love the Lord. Are you ready for that day to come? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? There's a sad day coming, a sad day coming, there's a sad day coming by and by, when the sinner shall hear his doom depart